going by, and there's lots of stuff going by every time, all the time, everything from sunlight to wind to water to soil running past. Catch it and store it. And this is a place that I taught for a while in the Bahamas, and it was out on a peninsula where they couldn't have a conventional septic system because it's just ground up coral is what the dirt is, the soil is. Well, there's no soil. So that if you put in a conventional septic system, the effluent would just go straight into the ocean before it was treated, and it's way too far from a municipal sewage system. So the folks there built these a conventional septic tank that then went into these two closed lagoons. There actually was an overflow at the end of them, but that's for a later bit of the story. Then they filled the lagoons full of ground up coral and planted them, so that now the toilets from the different dormitories there go into the septic system, and then the effluent flows into these lagoons full of plants. That's what it looked like the day that things were planted. That's what the whole setup looked like 3 months after it was planted. So it's got really good fertilizer and a lot of sun and water in it. And that's what it looked like 3 years after it was planted. So here's one of the lagoons right there. And there is a leach line that comes out of it that now feeds a bunch of nut trees, of tropical nut trees coming from it. So this is, and if you walk, and I have spent a lot of time taking the wealthy donors who make this school work, we'll take them for a tour and we'll stand right here and then we'll explain what's going on right there. And they're grossed out for a second, but it's so beautiful. But but this is what you can turn something usually we think of as pretty unpleasant into through these proper solutions. It's going by all the time. Catch it, convert it, turn it into something useful. So this is what you can do. And here is a building that actually the idea here was to turn the site that it was being put up on into a place that was better off for the building having been there. Usually a construction leaves the site worse off. And this was a forest that was overgrown and thick in Northern California, terrific fire hazard, and a meadow that was very badly eroding with big gullies on it. They thinned out poles from the forest and used them for various construction materials in the building. They dug different kinds of retention basins and erosion control structures called swales in the field and harvested the native grasses, used the grasses as insulation in the building, and used the earth from these retention basins for the construction material for the building, and wound up regenerating the meadow and stopping the erosion and also reducing the fire hazard in the forest as well, and getting a really nice building out of it to boot. So this is what the place looks like inside. It's all earthen and natural building materials, and every time someone walks in, I'd love to have a little tape recorder right here. That's the entry, because what you would hear is, oh, this is so nice. It feels like a wonderful, wonderful space, and it's left the building in better shape, or the land in better shape than it was before that building got there. So we need models, okay? How do we do this? The Amazon actually turns out to be more like a food forest than a jungle. The scientists have studied the species makeup of the Amazon, and find there are far more fruit trees and timber trees and nitrogen-fixing trees than you would expect just randomly. The Amazon has been tweaked by the people living in it for thousands of years to turn it into something more productive for human beings, but I think we all know that the Amazon is regarded as one of the wildest and most diverse places on the planet. So this is the sort of thing that people can do if they're really in tune with their environment. And then in temperate climates, most of North America, a huge part, the big river valleys were food forests as well in this country. The East Coast, for example, if you look at the tree makeup when Europeans got here, it was white oaks, which is a principal Native American food, the acorn themselves. It was walnuts, chestnuts, hickory nuts, beech nuts. Those were all the predominant species, and once the people who were tending those forests were removed from them, they reverted back to swamp maple and a lot of other species that are not productive for human beings. So a huge amount of the US, the Mississippi River Valley, large parts of Texas, I know, California, the Midwest, the East Coast, were food forests or other really productive landscapes that people had worked with for thousands of years. And just one of the examples archaeologists and anthropologists really thought that horticultural societies were this little tiny transition that people went through really quickly on their way from being a forager, then they were a gardener for a little while, and then they'd be farmers, that agriculture was the end. It turns out that you can be a horticulturist for thousands and thousands of years stably, and there are lots of examples of them. The Hopewell people who lived in Pennsylvania and New Jersey for 4,000 years were a really advanced culture that did extensive mound building, and they had really beautiful jewelry and a very, very ornate and involved culture as well, and they were there for at least 4,000 years as gardeners rather than as farmers. Of just a few more examples of this are, we've got the Northwest Coast people who did some farming, but a lot of gardening and a lot of foraging, living off of salmon and berries and things like that. We have in ancient Oaxaca in Mexico, people who tended a little bit of corn, but they mostly had giant food forests and amazing gardens. The Nua'alu in Indonesia are horticultural people that have been there for thousands of years. In the Owens Valley of California, the Paiute there for thousands of years, mostly tending plants and also doing some wild animal tending. And the Kumeya'i in Southern California, another horticultural people that were there for thousands of years, not really farmers, not really foragers, something in between for thousands of years. A couple of modern day examples, my friends the Bullock brothers who live in Washington State on Orcas Island in the San Juans, have a 5-acre food forest that can feed 50 people for weeks on end. Incredible fruit trees, nut trees, everything growing in it. Unbelievable place that you can just graze in, 50 people for weeks on end. Penny Livingston has a place in Northern California called the Regenerative Design Institute, and this is her rainwater catchment gray water pond with fish in it and an earthen building that is her office and her little food forest on her 1-acre plot there. And something that Penny says is that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a model is worth 1,000 pictures. And being able to go to a place like this and see it, and see this stuff in action, and realize that we really can do something that is liable to be really sustainable, is the models are what you need to see. Models really inspire you. So I want to finish up with this drawing here, this symbol that we call the permaculture flower, which again, the words are really small, but it's essentially all the things that you need for a sustainable society: tools and technology, culture and education, health, economics, land tenure and governance, nature and land stewardship, and the built environment, and everything that they have. These are all the pieces that we need to be putting together. I got started in permaculture about 20 years ago, mostly as kind of a hobby. You know, I just thought it was cool because I like the idea of using fewer resources, and since I'm fundamentally lazy too, just the idea of working with nature and letting nature do a lot of the work struck me as a really cool idea. So I got into it, but I think in the intervening decades things have gotten a little bit more urgent. You know, we got, in the 1973 OPEC oil embargo, I really thought was a wake-up call. I think anybody who, with their eyes open, could see that things were going to change, that this was the first sign that oil was not an infinite resource. And it was a wake-up call, and unfortunately we woke up for a little while and then we kind of rolled over and went back to sleep for about 35 years. And I think now we're starting to wake up again, but things are a little bit more urgent, and there are scientists like James Lovelock who thinks it's just plain old too late. There's some pessimistic folks who feel like, look, we got global warming, it's run away, the coastline, the oceans are going to rise and flood out our coastal cities, and on and on and on, the doom and gloom list that you hear. And I'm not that kind of a pessimist. I feel like the way I like to describe human beings is we're a just-in-time species. We're not very good at seeing stuff coming down the road. Even if it's there, we might see it, but we don't do anything. But by the time it gets right here, we take heroic action and we jump to make big changes. And I think that's where we are now, and I think those are the sorts of things that we're going to be able to do. But I think it's not an option anymore. We need to do this, and I mean the word need, not the way the United Nations means it around sustainability. I mean we need to be doing this. That if we don't do these changes, if we don't make a transition to a regenerative culture voluntarily, then those few human beings left are going to wind up making it because there's no other way to do it. And I would like to see us make it through it. And what I love about this event is that this is the beginning of that process. And here we are doing it. The earth needs it, we need it, and we're starting it. So have a wonderful renewable energy roundup, and thank you very much.